Ladies and gentlemen, on the line, Dr. Derrick Colon. Talk to us about why you decided to release this new documentary called the official documentary, The Bronx Created Hip Hop.
Yeah, so this was actually this was a documentary that I did in, I want to say 2023. And I just did it. Actually, I did it while I was recuperating from my cancer surgery. And so somebody suggested, hey, why don't you just sit and, you're at home. Why don't you take a lot of your stuff that you've already done and create a documentary, as much as I could, right? And so the idea was, I think we called it the original one, and it's still on the channel. It's with the cover with Kool Herc on it. Hip Hop is from the Bronx. That's what we called it. As years went on and we did the Latin breakdown, I revisited that one and I watched it again, and I noticed, I got better with the editing over time, and I said, man, I really just want to re-edit this and then add some new stuff to it. Some new information, tighten it up, make it look a little bit cleaner as much as I can. And that's really, where it came from.
Okay.
That idea of just repackaging it, so to speak.
Okay. There are folks out there who want to rewrite history and say that hip hop was started down south back in the 20s or 30s or whatever the case may be. I'm going to play this clip of you and Charlie Rock having a back and forth discussion on this topic, and then I would love to go deeper into it. Here is Dr. Colon and Charlie Rock discussing if hip hop came from the South.
Why do you feel that the Bronx is the home of hip hop?
Well, first of all, it's not a question of why I feel it. That is the fact. It is plain and simple. I was there, so I know. All right. I'm a B-boy from 1974 up. Okay. The end of 74 figure. Beginning of 75, my first year of high school. And I was going to Kool Herc parties, sneaking around, got plenty of beatings. I was already my baby spade era, So I know for a fact it started in the Bronx.
So now
I traveled to other boroughs, and I had family from down south. I can tell you, if you ask people who were from the South, who had relatives up here and visited, they will tell you the same thing. Okay? They will tell you the same thing. Because, the South, they were considered, we used to use the term Bamas and things like that. They wore skips. They really didn't start getting into all the Nikes and everything else until the video era started. And they were seeing the styles that were in New York.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And of course, people who were merchants started getting those styles like Nike sneakers and all that other stuff, and started opening stores in the South that sold that apparel. And so now you started seeing people from down south who were wearing a lot of the apparel that you saw up north. But so back in those days, that wasn't the case.
So when you hear people say that, many of the pioneers were from the South, so therefore, like they'll mention Mario,
Mario was the only one, and he came and adopted Bronx culture.
That is a small piece from the official documentary, The Bronx Created Hip Hop. Talk to us about why that clip is so important, Doc.
Well, again, it's addressing this rewriting of history that, they've gotten bolder as time went on. As time goes on, they get bolder. And, now it's not an argument for them. It started in the South because of this. That's not how history works. That's not how, information is put out there. Because I'm from somewhere doesn't mean I brought it with me from that place. And so to hear somebody like Charlie Rock, who is a Bronx native, tell you that, you know, it's Bronx culture. It's not Southern culture. When Mario came, again, I'm not around when Mario came. You know, I'm in the Bronx, but I'm not around him. So I don't know what type of a person he was. All I can say is what I've heard, you know, the guys from the channel that they call, I guess, The Culture Since 71. And you hear interviews about Mario when he came here, and they say themselves, like, Mario was wearing pointy shoes and he was real country and we used to make fun of him. And, well, you know, obviously he came from another place and he came to the Bronx. He adopted Bronx culture. So that's just so important because of the fact that if we don't get this story straight, people are going to change the story. As people start dying off and people start disappearing, the story is going to be in, you know, 50 years, hip hop started in North Carolina, you know, and no, that's not going to happen. You know, we're not going to allow that to happen.
Very important. Hope you all are paying attention out there. You got a lot of pushback for your other documentary, The Latin Breakdown. Remind us what that doc is about.
That documentary was really about tracing the B-boy anthems, or I should say the sound of the B-boy anthems, back to original source. And so we took it back to Africa, from Africa through the slave trade into the Caribbean, specific Caribbean islands, Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, which are Latin American islands. Those are Latin American countries in Latin America, but those are the islands specifically. And then from those islands, we get to, you know, New York City. And then, you know, we traced, it's really a beautiful piece because of the tracing. So we trace back, you know, when we get to like the 30s and the 40s, and we get into places like the Palladium Ballroom in Manhattan. And then you have, you know, right up the street, you have Birdland. And Birdland was where the jazz musicians were playing, and the Palladium is where the Latin musicians were playing, and they were intermingling. They were going to each other's spots and jamming with each other. This is as early as the 40s. And so, you know, we even traced it back before that, where we looked at people like James Reese Europe when it came to ragtime. And we saw how James Reese Europe had, you know, recruited Puerto Rican musicians, mainly a gentleman by the name of Rafael Hernandez. And then you have Ed Fletcher with Bob Escudero. And then you have Duke Ellington with Juan Tisol. So this is ragtime, where you see blacks and Puerto Ricans rocking together musically. But the real change came when we get to Dizzy Gillespie and Chano Pozo and Manteca. And that seminal hit, that seminal work was vital, because that's the first time in history that African American musicians utilized the polyrhythms. They did not use the conga drums. They did not use the bongo. They did not use those instruments at all until Dizzy incorporates this into his band. But again, you hear that Latin feel in songs like Caravan with Duke Ellington and all that. And so when we trace it back, go to the 50s, you hear it in doo-wop. You hear the clave in doo-wop. You go to the 60s. Now you start to hear it in funk. Go to the 70s. Now you start to hear it in disco. And it was those records, yes, primarily African-American musicians who were utilizing the polyrhythms now because of what was done at the Palladium among Latinos. And so that beautiful marriage happens, and now African-American musicians are utilizing this same funky polyrhythm, with that Latin flavor. And then the seminal work, which was originally done, I might add, in 1970. It wasn't in 72. It was 1970 that It's Just Begun was released originally. And then it was re-released in 1972. So you hear Jimmy Castor, where many people were saying, no, Jimmy Castor is an African-American and there's nothing Latin about It's Just Begun. And then you hear him say, no, not only was it Latin, I was influenced by Latins, I was playing like Latins, and I was definitely bringing that flavor to It's Just Begun. And then the rest is just, testimony after testimony of the importance, the Latino contribution, the Latino connection to hip hop is in the sounds. And this all came about, Dusty, because somebody asked me, hey, what did you bring from your culture to hip hop? And that's what led to this deep research of saying, all right, we gotta go deep into the weeds now, and we gotta pull out. And nobody's really been able to, we had a couple of these guys who try to come up with silly arguments, saying, Dizzy Gillespie was wrong, Felipe Luciano was wrong. Okay, that's your argument. But nobody really dealt with an hour and, over an hour and change documentary. You pick out pieces because you really can't deal with the information. And that's, I was waiting for Tariq Nasheed to come out and say something. He, not a peep, nothing. So I'm very proud of that work, proud of the people that helped make that happen, man. The list is endless, and 90% of the interviews that you see in the Latin Breakdown were interviews that were done organically. These weren't clips I took. These were people I talked to. These were people I spoke to, and I asked them, I'm going to send you these questions. I need you to film yourself. We had to use what we had, bro. I don't have a $30,000 budget, $1 million budget. I just used what I had, and I'm very proud of what came out of that piece of work.
Yeah, I appreciate that very much, and I appreciate your new documentary as well. I'm going to post it in the comments or in the description section so everyone can check out the official documentary, The Bronx Created Hip Hop. So let me get this straight. I got to rewind just a quick bit. So you're saying after Tariq Nasheed putting out his documentary, a good documentary, I'm not going to lie, it was a good documentary for sure.
Yes,
he put out his documentary. He challenged a lot of stuff that you said. But are you saying that after you released the Latin Breakdown, he never came back to refute anything that you said in that documentary?
No. Wow. And I think it's mainly because I think in his mind, he's saying, I can't give this guy any more light. If I start talking about it, people are going to go watch it. And I don't want people to watch it. So he just keeps my name out of his mouth. Unfortunately, the other guys, they don't think that way. So I welcome it because you're drawing more people to the content. And this is what I want. I want people to see the documentaries. It's one thing to just sit on YouTube. I want people to engage in it, to see it, to think about it, and to say, you know what? There's something to this, right? Mm-hmm. That's the whole goal of, these pieces of work.
Yeah, and you said something I definitely agree with. Your haters are your biggest advertisers, so bring it on. This video included, I'm sure, will be 80%, 90% hate. But bring it on, because all it does is just bring attention to me, and I appreciate it. And it'll also bring his attention to Dr. Derrick Colon. Bring it on, bring it on. Hey, tell us, let's go back to your documentary, the official documentary, The Bronx Created Hip Hop. Tell us about some of the gangs in the 70s around this time, and go a little bit deeper into this whole swastika thing as well. Don't give us too much, because we want to watch the documentary, obviously, but break it down as much as you can. Maybe some of the different types of gangs and this whole swastika thing as well.
Yeah. You know, so growing up in the Bronx, you know, the gang era. Now, the gang era is not unique to the 70s. There's been gangs in the Bronx since, you know, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. You know, there's always been gangs in New York City. I shouldn't just say the Bronx, but in the Bronx, it was a different type of energy when it came to the outlaws or the cliques, as they called them. And, you know, some of these gangs were gangs like the Savage Skulls, the Savage Nomads, the Chingalings, the Black Spades, the 70 Immortals, the Bachelors, the Mongols, you know, and the Ghetto Brothers. You know, the list goes on and on. There was over 100 gangs, right? Now, what's important to understand is that the majority of the gangs in the Bronx at that time, pre-hip-hop, were Latino, the majority. Okay, the Black Spades they weren't even a black gang. They had numerous Puerto Ricans in the Black Spades from the beginning of the Black Spades. Okay, so this idea that, well, we were together rocking in the gang era, but when hip hop comes along, which we didn't even have a name for it, the Latinos went and did something else, and the African Americans went and did hip hop. But yet we were together in the gang era. Now, excuse me for coughing. Now, the idea that because, you know, in prison, there's this term that was given to the Puerto Ricans, and they were called Germans, right? And so the idea, and again, this is just ignorance on the part of Tariq Nasheed for making such a dumb statement as to, you know, these brothers were rocking swastikas. They didn't even like Black Americans. You know, he clearly does not understand gang culture. And so the swastika, as is pointed out in the documentary, The Bronx, the Home of Hip Hop, is the idea that the enforcers of the gangs were the ones who wore the swastika. It was a menacing symbol. It was a symbol that they got from the white biker gangs, the MC gangs, like Hell's Angels. You know, you see the skulls, you see the iron crosses, and the swastikas. And so the only people that really rocked those swastikas were the enforcers. They were the ones who would carry out punishment. And it was just a symbol in the streets, stay away. That's all it was. People knew, stay away. And what's funny is that, you know, when people say, well, the Puerto Ricans were the ones rocking the swastikas, but yet we can see, and you'll see this in the documentary, you see Bam Bam from the Black Spades, who was the supreme warlord of the Black Spades, on his jacket at the 71 meeting. He has a Black Liberation flag, he has a swastika on his jacket, and he has a Puerto Rican patch on his right arm. So nobody would ever say, and what's funny about that, Dusty, is people see that and they still ignore it. They still, no, the Black Spades never wore that. Look, it's right there. I mean, you could talk to Bam Bam himself. He's still alive. So, you know, that's really what the swastika was about.
Okay. You mentioned in the doc that after all of your research, everything led back to Kool Herc. Break that down.
Yeah, man. You know, the DJs are the ones who create the culture. The foundation are twofold. The DJs who played the breaks and the B-boys or the breakers. There is no other DJ before Kool Herc who did what Kool Herc did. Now, were there DJs? Yes. Were there DJs playing those same records? Yes. We see that in the Latin breakdown when we talk about the rock scene. But they weren't doing what Herc was doing, specifically the merry-go-round. Okay, he was focusing on the drums, the percussion, the breakdown. Where a lot of the other DJs, pre-Herc, the disco DJs, would play those same records, but they would play the record and they would even blend the record to extend it a little bit. Okay, those are facts, but they weren't doing what Herc was doing. And the energy, again, everybody that went to a Herc party, and I've never been to a Herc party, never claimed to have been to a Herc party. I was way too young. But the energy in the room, as you heard in the Bronx, the home of hip hop, you hear Mel talk about that. It was a clear sound. It was this really different type of an atmosphere that Herc brings, and the foundation of Herc's power was sound clash culture. It's what he would have gotten in his native Jamaica. Now, before Herc, you had the DJs in Brooklyn and the DJs in Queens. And if you watch the documentary called The Founding Fathers, you would see that even those DJs and the people who built those sound systems hail from Jamaica. They hail from the Caribbean. That whole culture comes from Jamaica. And to say, no, the Jamaicans got it from Americans, there's no way. The Jamaicans were doing this as early as 1952. Okay, and then Sound Clash went from Jamaica. Then the 60s came and it went to the UK, it went to China, it went to different locations, China or Japan, one of those two. Forgive me if I misspoke that. But and then it comes to the US. Now, Herc is 12 years old when he gets here. So he's not building sounds, but his father is. His father is the one who is kind of schooling him. His father was into it back home. Okay. And so there are certain things that we see within the hip hop culture that, unbeknownst to many, even the pioneers, they don't make this connection. And I don't know how they don't do this, is the fact that the first battles that you see in the hip hop context before it was called hip hop was not B-boy against B-boy. It was not MC against MC. It was sound system against sound system. Mm-hmm. So you would have, maybe at 123, you would have Bambaataa on one side of the gym, and you would have Disco King Mario on the other side of the gym, or Tex DJ Hollywood on the other side. And the battle would be whose sound system was loudest and whose records were the rarest. That comes specifically from sound clash culture in Jamaica. There's no doubt about that. The other thing that comes out of that sound clash culture, and this is something Coxsone Dodd himself said. He said what they used to do during these sound clashes is that they would take the labels of the records and they would scratch off the names so nobody could see what record they were playing. This was the 50s and the 60s, bro. This is pre jams in the Bronx. And then Herc's father tells Herc to put your records in the bathtub and soak off the labels to hide them. This is his father telling him. Again, there are elements. Now, what I'm not saying is, I'm not saying that hip hop comes from Jamaica. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the foundational essence of the sound systems and of this vibe of a turntable with a selector. The dub plates come out of Jamaica. You know, originally they were listening to, like, in the 50s, they were listening to like Chubby Checker and African American musicians. But when rock and roll came into play, Jamaica wasn't feeling it. They didn't like it. This is from the words of Coxsone Dodd himself. We didn't like it. So we had to come up with our own sound. And this is where dub plates come in. They're creating dub plates. They're creating their own records with these B-sides that are just, you know, heavy echo, heavy treble. And then you notice that there's one turntable. There's not two. There's one turntable, and there's somebody on a microphone. And when they're playing the record, at a certain point, they'll either say rewind or they'll say wheel, and the record will spin back. And then they'll replay it again. That was originally the concept. And then, you know, and I'm not saying Flash saw that and, oh, let me do this on two turntables and bring it back, but without, you know, making that sound. No, I'm not saying that. But when you can't help but look back at all of this and say, you can't tell me that there is no inspiration from a man who's from Jamaica. He comes from Jamaica. He comes from Kingston. He understands the musical culture of his island. You can't tell me that he doesn't bring some of that essence with him, along with a mixture of funk and American music. Again, it's multicultural. So for me, that's how Herc is the father of the culture, in the sense that Herc was a graffiti writer before he was a DJ, and then he was a DJ. So he is the father in that sense. He didn't create break dancing. He didn't create breaking. He didn't create b-boying, but he's the one who names them. He comes up with that coinage. And the b-boys are really burners at that point. They're not breaking, they're burning. Okay, and then, you know, a little later they start hitting the floor along with a bunch of other people. So, long story short, Herc is the foundation.
There it is.
Yeah.
You recently interviewed Africa Bambaataa. What could a person learn about the origins of hip hop by listening to that interview?
Well, you know, when I wanted to go to the source, to one of the sources. And I asked Bam the ultimate question. Are Puerto Ricans guests in the house of hip hop? And there were people who watched and listened to that interview and said, well, he kind of beat around the bush. I don't feel that way at all. I feel as though he took us deeper. See, this is a problem. People are afraid when it comes to this topic to go deep in the weeds, and they'll make excuses. Well, we don't have to get deep in the weeds. This is just obvious. No, it's not obvious, as obvious as you think. So when he answers this and he says, you first of all need to know your history. And if you don't know your history, you need to just be quiet. Stop talking. And he starts to talk about the unity between black and brown. In fact, he says we're one people. So to say Puerto Ricans weren't doing this or doing that, He says it's silly. It's ridiculous. And he points out, and this is where he starts going back in history, and he starts pointing out, listen, one of the best curators of Black American history was a Puerto Rican, Arturo Schomburg, who has a library in Harlem. This is Bam saying this. Then he says, in our gang days, we used to have the Black Liberation flag and the Puerto Rican patches. So we were always together. He said, where you saw us dancing, you saw the Puerto Ricans dancing. And where you saw the Puerto Ricans dancing, you saw us dancing. So in a nutshell, 17-minute interview, which I encourage everybody to go watch. And this is another thing, brother. Nobody has come back and said anything about that interview. And I wonder why. I was waiting for these dudes to come out of the woodwork. Not one rebuttal about the interview. Now, I understand. I get it. People don't want to really associate because of the allegations. I get all that. But you cannot remove that man from the history. If you did that, you'd have to remove half of the leadership of this country who had plenty of skeletons in their closet. I'm not saying he did anything or he didn't do anything. I'm saying my interview was about the history of hip hop and somebody who lived it from its inception. And as far as he's concerned, we're one people and we were together. We were doing this together, So I'm actually planning a part 2. Already confirmed this. We don't know when, where I'm really gonna dig deep in the questions and talk about the parties, talk about who was at these parties, But Bam doesn't. He just thinks this is a silly argument. So this is why he answers the way he does, because it's like we're one people. What are we talking about? This is ridiculous. So that was a great interview. Shout out to my man Prince Whip who got that interview for me. And I'm scheduled to interview Whip as well. But yeah, so Whip set that up, and that was a jewel, man. I couldn't believe it. I was like, man, I really would love to interview him. And he made that happen. So that was a beautiful thing. Shout out Prince Whip, another pioneer in this game. Yes. Dr. Derrick Colon, the official documentary, The Bronx Created Hip Hop. I'll post the link in the description. Make sure you guys go check it out. Tell them Dusty Vision sent you. Tell everybody where they can find you and what you have coming up next. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, again, we rebranded. Rebranded the channel. So YouTube, it's Hip-Hopology, the study of hip hop. And so for those who may be wondering, what does that mean? So hip is a separate word. Hopology. So ology is the study of. So, psychology, the study of, the psyche. Bibliology, the study of the Bible. Theology, the study of God. Hip-Hopology, the study of hip hop. And they just type that in. If you type in at Hip-Hopology NYC, it'll take you there, or just type in Hip-Hopology, the study of hip hop. It's the same place, same stuff. I just changed the name, rebranded it. And then what do we have coming up? The 31st, we have the year in review, where we're going to be going through a lot of this stuff that we're talking about tonight, plus some other things that have been happening within the hip hop community in the Bronx in 2025. We have some great interviews coming up in January. We have how many? I think 3 interviews coming up in January. And if you just go to Hip-Hopology, the study of hip hop, you could see those upcoming interviews. And of course, Facebook, I believe Facebook is Derrick Colon, and then Instagram. And if you go to my channel and you just click, the area where the links are more. It'll bring you to all the links. I have a blog page that I've been doing some writing on, and I'm working on the book, man. The book is going to be released December 25th, 2026. It's called Hip Hop History, Origins and Elements, and it's going to be a tome, you know, on the culture. There hasn't been a book since Jeff Chang's book, since Yes, Yes, Y'all, since, you know, the Hip Hop Files, since Subway Art. These are the seminal works, since Stephen Hagar's book, which I think was the first book. There hasn't really been a book that really, and so because we're finding so much new information and changing of the story, I said, man, we got to do something to really push, not a new narrative, obviously not, but to clear up a lot of stuff. And so I really want this to be a juggernaut. This is not going to be a quick read. This is going to be a big book, encyclopedia status. And so this is why I'm taking so long to write it. And I'm working with numerous people to really, really dig in the weeds and get the information and do the best that I can. So that's a project that's coming up for, next year. Yes, sir.
Beautiful, beautiful. I appreciate everything you do, Doc. Keep up the great work.
Appreciate you, brother.
Yeah.
Thank you, man, for the interview. And as always, man, let's stay in touch and let me know what you got going on.
Most def.